I'm Kim Kenobi, and I'd like to welcome you to this talk, which is called Maths and Madness, an academic dance with bipolar disorder. My intention is to talk for about half an hour, leave some time for questions at the end. What I'd like to do first is to give you some sense of the backdrop to my arrival here in Aberystwyth about 10 years ago. And our story begins in June 1995. So, I was a medical student in Edinburgh at the time, and 1st of June, lots of my friends were very concerned about my behaviour, and I ended up in psychiatric hospital. That was kind of the beginning of the manifestation of my mental illness. So, I needed to resit my summer term. I did just biochemistry the following summer, got through second year fine, finished the preclinical phase of medicine in 1997, but starting the clinical phase of medicine, it triggered my squeamishness, and I was not in a very good place anyway, and I ended up not being able to cope with clinical medicine and transferred to maths. So I went straight into the second year in the Scottish system on a maths and statistics degree. So I did second year, third year, fourth year, got very, very well ill indeed in my fourth year, needed to resit my fourth year. So eventually, after 7 years, I graduated with maths in Edinburgh. So it was 3 years of medicine and then 4 years of maths. I then moved on to St Andrews, where I did a master's in research. It was a new degree that had been set up in environmental biology conversion for physicists, mathematicians, and molecular biologists. I ended up doing a wonderful project about the shapes of dolphins and whales and their evolutionary relationships with a wonderful Professor John Raven. Then after that, I worked for a little while in Birmingham on a consultancy basis for the Birmingham Race Action Partnership before starting my PhD in Nottingham in statistical shape analysis, where I could continue some of the ideas that I'd begun to develop in my master's project. So I had my 3 years of my PhD. I spent a year after that working in the graduate school in Nottingham University, training PhD students in transferable skills. I had a year's lectureship as a statistician, and then moved on to a multidisciplinary plant biology project. It was called the Centre for Plant Integrative Biology in Nottingham, where I was a statistician among many, many disciplines. There were plant biologists, there were physicists, applied mathematicians, computer scientists, me as the only statistician. And then October the 14th, 2014, we moved here. There was a new MSc that had been set up in Statistics for Computational Biology, and it was a great fit for my skill set. So that's a mainly kind of could feature on the CV kind of version of events. But there's also the way that mental illness impacted those years. The 7 years at Edinburgh were very, very colourful. There was a lot going on in those years. I think I was in and out of psychiatric hospital 25 times in those 7 years. I was unmedicated. I refused to take any medication. That made it all the more colourful. St Andrews, I was on to 2.5 milligrams of antipsychotic, which is almost homeopathic as a dose, so that didn't do very much. It went up to 5 milligrams for my PhD, almost held me stable, a few little blips here and there, and eventually it got on to the 7.5 milligrams of antipsychotic that I take as my maintenance dose today. And I can really identify those different phases. There's the 2.5, there's the no medication, there's the 2.5 milligram phase, the 5 milligram phase, the 7.5 milligram phase. But yeah, finally we're kind of beginning to kind of get there. So that's really the backdrop, okay? But then, as I say, we arrived here on the 14th of October 2014 to start this statistics lectureship. And what I now want to give you a little bit of a sense of is my current role. So what do I do as a statistics lecturer? And one thing, apart from the foundation year students, I have contact with all of the years, which I'm very happy about. So I do a skills thing with the first years, and I also have one of the games and puzzles modules. I help on the applied statistics course for the second years. I teach stochastic models in finance and topics in biological statistics for the third years. I do some work with the MMath students, including project supervision, writing workshops and that sort of thing. And then I'm lucky enough to work with MSc students, and lots of different types of MSc students. So there are MSc data science students, there are MSc, this one that I mentioned, this statistics in computational biology. I think there's an AI MSc as well. So quite a range of MSc students, and I see PhD students. So some of the PhD students join in with my courses, and I'm supervising 2 PhD students. one of whom's here, Emily, and so both of those PhD students are working on data to do with dolphins. So it's rather nice that my dolphin theme that I began in St Andrews all those years ago is now maturing into something else. So I've got one PhD student working on data from the Cardigan Bay Marine Wildlife Centre. So we've got the West Wales dolphins covered. And then Emily is looking at social networks in dolphins off the east coast of Scotland. So I'm kind of integrating all the dolphins in Britain by being here in Aberystwyth. So that feels very good. In terms of research, last year I finished a big project which was called Echoes, which was the effects of climate change on bird coastal communities on both sides of the Irish Sea. And I ended up carrying out a big piece of work about curlew ecology. So now people have found two wonderful sources of gifts for me, lots of things to do with dolphins, lots of things to do with curlew, so it's all kind of flooding in. I consider myself very fortunate to work in the maths department. I've got great colleagues. I feel very, very supported. I'm given a lot of autonomy. My research is very satisfying to me, and I love the kind of contact with biology that I have from that. So it's a wonderful work situation that I find myself in here, working in the maths department. And then my admin roles, on top of the teaching and research, are employability champion for maths. So I invite speakers, I try and get events organised, I work with Lorraine here from Careers, so try to provide a sort of reasonable diversity of employability related opportunities for people. And my other role is equality champion, and we've got Dylan in the room somewhere who coordinates all these equality champions. And that's a role I'd like to do more with, really. I feel I've got a lot to offer, and I kind of count this as something to do with my diversity and inclusion role. But that's an amazing group of people to work with, so I'm very, very lucky. Now, of course, it hasn't been plain sailing these last 10 years. There's been a lot going on, and there have been lots of challenges. And what I want to do in this next section is walk us all over a bridge. So this is a bridge of 3 parts, and we'll stop at each part, well, the final part very briefly, but we'll stop at each part and have a look at the view. So the 3 parts of this bridge are overthinking, analysis, and cerebration. So 3 words which are almost the same thing, but not quite. So first, we start to walk up the bridge, and we come to this idea of overthinking. And as I look out over the bridge and I survey the view, one thing I want to remember here is a woman I met. I was sitting in a coffee house in Edinburgh. It was called the Elephant House on George IV Bridge, lovely coffee shop in Edinburgh. And I was with a group of medical students, and we were discussing a medical students international conference that was coming up. And there was this woman who was also kind of part of this group. And I was chatting away, arms waving, kind of plenty of energy, effusive stuff. And at one point she looked me dead in the eye and she said, "Kim, you think too much." And it's kind of really stuck with me, and I think she was onto something. So that's overthinking. Then the key one really is analysis. I mean, I've already mentioned the topic of my PhD, which was statistical shape analysis. So clearly there's a lot of analysis that goes on. And over the years, I've wrestled with analysis in some ways. And there are lots of ideas I could have talked about with analysis. Change, for example, where with my PhD I was analysing the change of shapes of rat skulls, or I could talk about time, or I could talk about infinity, I could talk about infinitesimals, I could talk about how I try to analyse and define all my thoughts, I could talk about Wikipedia, evolution, all these sorts of things. But the ones I want to focus on are time and understanding. So first, time, and this has kind of gone in interesting directions. It's gone to the very large, and it's gone to the very, very small in my kind of analysis of time. So, I mean, I said I was doing my project about the evolution of dolphins in St Andrews. So there I was considering time frames of maybe 50 or 60 million years. And that felt like a lot, but I was looking at this wonderful encyclopedia of mammals and realising, well, the story goes a lot deeper than that. So on one level, I sort of consider time on these geological or evolutionary timescales. And then the other part of my analysis is kind of breaking time up into smaller pieces and sort of getting involved in thinking about quantum mechanics and the subatomic. And there's something called the Planck time. So the Planck time is 0.00001 seconds, where we've got 44 of those zeros. So the Planck time is not very much time, really, but what quantum physicists say is that you can't infinitely break down time, because at a certain point, space-time becomes granular. You may not entirely understand what I'm talking about. I'm not sure I entirely understand what I'm talking about, but nevertheless, quantum mechanics has kind of bamboozled me with my proficiency at analysis. So time has been, quite an important part of my pathology, and that's been present even in my time in Aberystwyth. And then the final thing I want to say on this bit of the bridge is understanding. So I've been on a rampant quest for understanding on some kind of deep level. And I thought about it as I was preparing for my talk, and I thought, well, what did I kind of mean by understanding as I was going through this? And I decided that the fairly high bar I'd set myself in terms of understanding was to say, right, I understand something if you put me in a monastic cell with a big block of paper and a pen and no access to a mobile phone at all. If I can write a Wikipedia article without reference to anything, then maybe I understand something. So I figured, okay, I'm maybe being a little harsh on myself, and I'll come back to this understanding because there's something a bit later which really relates to that. So there we are, that's a little bit on analysis. And then finally, as we leave the bridge, cerebration. And for me, that's kind of just really a word that means living in my head. And so cerebration, or letting go of cerebration, is really about allowing myself to consider that I'm more than a brain on legs. Okay, so that's what we'll take from that bit as we leave the bridge. So you may be wondering, what is this a bridge to? Well, this next section is called Anatomy of an Episode. I liked anatomy as a medical student, and I think anatomy is a great idea. So anatomy of an episode. What goes on when things really go to pieces? And one of the important things is sleep. I'm confident I've never had even a hypomanic episode without at least 3 nights of very, very disrupted sleep. And so it's great to have come to a recognition of that, because that gives me a way of intervening that could stop me from spiralling out. Provided I can stop myself from having 3 or more nights of utterly disrupted sleep, I can potentially steer away from these manic episodes. So sleep has always been there. Stress is of one sort or another is invariably a contributing factor leading on to the sleeplessness. And then medication was my next kind of theme here. Historically, I've been hopeless with medication. I've at times even completely come off my medication thinking, oh, it'll be fine. So historically, I've not handled the medication quite so well, but now I find that the medication offers me a way to balance what are quite challenging kind of creative forces with all this bipolar disorder. So the 3 drugs I have at my disposal, sodium valproate is a long-term mood stabilizer, which I have once messed with, but I generally don't mess with that one at all. That's just a gram a day, and that's long-term mood stabilizer. I've got an antipsychotic called olanzapine, and I'm now on this maintenance dose of 7.5 milligrams. And I've got a 3rd drug, which is called zopiclone, which is a sleeping medication. That one comes in 2 sizes. 3.75 is usually enough. If I have to go up to 7.5, then things are really in a bit of a mess. And so those 2, the latter 2, olanzapine and zopiclone, I've got control over, and I can up and down as I need to. And in my preparation for this talk, I upped my level of antipsychotic, and I included a sleeping tablet. I figured this was kind of going to be a big day, and I was right. so I've needed a bit of extra medication in the run up to this. So that's kind of the medication side of things. Timings wise, that initial kind of shock from the sleep deprivation usually then leads to a 2 or 3 week episode. Hypomanic if I'm lucky, manic if we're into the realm of, I don't know, crazy stuff. So then there's a 2 or 3 week period, and then it can take me a long time to kind of wind down after that. 6 weeks maybe, sometimes even longer, sometimes even 2 months. And often in that winding down time, I experience times of feeling a bit blue, I experience a bit of restlessness, and there's definitely there's an arc to the trajectory of these episodes. But my thoughts, so the three words I had about my thoughts during an episode are churning, so there's kind of this really frenetic energy about the thoughts. Then another one was eccentric was a word I used. They're kind of quite unusual thoughts that I have in these spaces. And the last one was mystical. There's been quite a mystical quality to a lot of my thinking, in the same way that Pythagoras got a bit confused about the mystical nature of numbers, or Kepler, when he was looking at planets, was trying to force the ratios of the radii of the planet's orbits to the kind of the Pythagorean solids, or Platonic solids. So there were kind of that sort of mysticism with playing with numbers and symbols. But what I've got time for now is a particular story of an episode. And I want to take you back now to May 2015. So we hadn't been here long. We'd arrived here in October of 2014. There was a good handover in terms of medical health service provision. And I was hooked up with Gorwellian, so I had a psychiatrist in Gorwellian. And this psychiatrist, she looked up the medication I was on, and she said, "Oh, you're taking olanzapine, that's not a very good drug. I know a better drug." So there was a drug called Abilify. I don't know what, aripiprazole, I think is its proper name. So Abilify, she was convinced I would be better off on Abilify, and tried to effect this change starting on about the 1st of May, or sometime around May in 2015. So my teaching had just finished. Thank goodness my teaching had just finished. So I was vaguely starting to build a support network, and this kind of perturbation from this psychiatrist, and there was me going, well, I can recognise that olanzapine isn't a very nice drug. Oh, Abilify, that sounds great. Yeah, let's go for that one. Anyway, this was really not handled well, triggered a massive episode. And just to give you one little snippet of it, I was on a walk with Charlie at one point by the coast, and I saw some nettles. And to me, these nettles looked like spaceships. I thought they were incredible shapes, all these nettles, and I was waxing lyrical about the alien sort of architecture around us. Anyway, so at a certain point, Charlie and I had to go down to Kent. We had to help Charlie's dad clear some stuff out of one of the rooms in his house. By this point, I was on 15 milligrams of olanzapine, because at that dose it becomes an anti-manic drug rather than an antipsychotic. So I was on 15 milligrams of olanzapine. I was still taking my sodium valproate. I was taking 7.5 milligrams of my sleeping tablets, and I had this other one that I took in the morning. I was under an absolute load of drugs at this point. And so we were sleeping on the floor in Charlie's dad's house, in downstairs on a mattress, and it got to the point where barefoot on a carpet, I was so hypersensitive, barefoot on a carpet, just was jangling all through my body, just this kind of terrible cocktail of drugs in my system. And there was a night I remember very clearly, so there we were, Charlie and I lying on the floor, and I thought to myself, I really feel I've given this new drug a fair trial. I think maybe I'm going to accept that this experiment hasn't worked. What if I don't have to take Abilify tomorrow morning? And I just felt this wave of relief. So I thought, right, okay, I'm not going to take Abilify tomorrow morning. And then I was on familiar ground. I needed to get myself off the extra level of olanzapine, and I needed to calm my system down, but it was just coming out of a manic episode. It wasn't throwing in this extra drug as well. So yeah, that's kind of, well, that's one episode that I felt happy to share today. So yeah, that's my anatomy of an episode. Right, well, we're past the kind of difficult bit now. So now we've done all the mad stuff, and now it's really me talking about what I do to kind of counter this kind of phenomenal beast that accompanies me through life. And the first thing I want to talk about is writing. Slightly more general than that. So there's a book called The Artist's Way, which is by a woman called Julia Cameron. And I think when I bought it, the subtitle was 12 weeks, a 12-week course in recovering and discovering your creative self. Now, I went through this book 5 times at least during my time in Edinburgh. She recommends 3 basic tools for creative recovery, and then there's a whole load of other exercises as you work through the book. And the 3 basic tools are what she calls the morning pages, where every morning I write longhand 3 pages of A4, which takes me about half an hour, and it's just brain drain. It doesn't have to be good quality art. I'm not aiming to produce great literature. It's just getting the creative juices flowing for the day. So that's morning pages. The second one is a walk, ideally daily, but at least once a week. Take a walk by yourself, possibly in nature, possibly in a town or whatever. And the last tool is what she calls an artist's date, where you put aside a block of time for yourself, you listen in to what your inner artist wants, and you do it. So my artist dates have included taking a pad and paper and doing some drawing in the museum, or going to the Museum of Modern Art in Machynlleth, or going to Stratford, Florida, or having a day out in Aberystwyth. It's more difficult here. In Edinburgh, you've got a lot of things to do as artist states. You have to be a bit more creative here in Aberystwyth. But those are really key tools for me, and a very important part of kind of, charting where I am, I suppose. And I can, sometimes the writing's harder than other times, but it's quite a good barometer of how things are going for me. So the other strand of this writing part is autobiographical writing. And there's a book which was published in about 2008, I think, which I wrote, which is called Memories of Mania. And if you want to know more about that kind of 7 years in Edinburgh, a year in St Andrews, PhD, and the year of my graduate school time, that book goes into quite a lot of detail. So that's published under my name, Kim Evans, which was the name I had at birth. So that's Memories of Mania. But I've just finished, not yet submitted it, but I've just finished a second autobiographical book. It's a far more ambitious title. This title is Letting Go of Madness. And I used a device which is, I've got something which is called Story World. And Story World is it's a pack of cards and a book which gives explanations for the cards. And they're kind of archetypal cards. So there's a sort of family section. So you've got father, mother, youngest son, youngest daughter, dog, cat. You've got some royal archetypes. So there's king and queen and princess and prince, and jester is probably in there. There's the land of fairy, and there's a magical set as well. So there's a kind of talisman, there's a well of remembering, a spell of forgetting, all this sort of stuff. So these kind of fantasy-themed archetypal cards, and I used a spread of cards as the sort of scaffolding on which to build each of my chapters for this Letting Go of Madness book. And so the first one, for example, was called Fleeing the Nest, and the cards I had for that were Mother, Labyrinth, Castle, Knight. So the story there is I left the familial home, entered the chaos of the labyrinth of life, met Charlie, and then our marriage became a great castle that facilitated my becoming the knight that I view as my kind of true integrated self. So that was kind of chapter one's spread. But then interestingly, in the second chapter, which was called Navigating the Labyrinth, where the labyrinth is kind of this old sprawl of cards, again it starts with the mother and there's a labyrinth in the middle, all sorts of other stuff. But the knight there is joined by the man in the moon. And for me, the man in the moon is a great companion, because the man in the moon is a much more constant, a much more reliable, a much more secure sort of time presence than either quantum mechanics or my somewhat garbled sense of evolutionary biology. So having the man in the moon as a companion is actually helping me navigate time in a different way and recognise that despite the incredible ultra-evanescence of the mind that I identify with, particularly when I'm in a bad place, actually the world is quite stable. So I like having the man in the moon to help me negotiate time. So that was writing. And then the other things I want to talk about are meditation and hypnosis. Those are tools that really help me as well. So in terms of meditation, I've recently started doing a body scan on a daily basis, where you kind of focus on the different parts of your body and just tune into your body in space and really connect with your kind of physical presence. That's an idea that somebody called Jon Kabat-Zinn developed. He's a very, very prominent mindfulness writer, and when he was working at MIT, he put together an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And he's written a wonderful book which is called Full Catastrophe Living. I think we can all do with a bit of that. So, full catastrophe living. So body scans are part of it. And in terms of meditation, I like quiet time. I go to Quakers quite often on a Sunday, so that's just an hour of silent worship, unless anybody wants to say anything. But I find being with people in silence feels different to just sitting on my own in silence. So I quite enjoy that held space of kind of serenity and peace at Quakers. And then in terms of hypnosis, I've tried various things in the past, but I've settled on two, which I like. One of them is Paul McKenna's I Can Make You Sleep app. And yeah, I mean, from what I've said, you can understand why I have an interest in Paul McKenna's I Can Make You Sleep app. And one of the things he says, which relates back to what I talked about on the analysis bridge, is he said, you do not need to understand everything in order to sleep. There are some things you don't need to understand. And that comment, I mean, I listened to this a lot. One year I did it every day for 8 months, so I've got these comments kind of buzzing around my head. And that idea of let go of trying to understand it all, let go of the analysis. It's okay, let go and relax. And so that's been quite helpful. And the other one that I've settled on, which I like, is I can make you thin, where one of the things he's talking about there is to make you lose weight and feel happier. And it's really a big focus on mindful eating. I think mindful eating is really important, and I like it when I do it. I recognise I don't always do it, and I'd like to kind of up my level of mindful eating. So that's kind of some of my countermeasures to kind of ride the wave of my bipolar disorder. And then finally, I just want to talk about my situation right now. So my wife Charlie is here in the audience. I have a beautiful relationship with Charlie. My dad's also come along. My parents now live in Aberystwyth, so they've been here for a few years, and it's a delight to have them down the road. We live in an amazing place. We've got a beautiful extension where I can sit and look out over the Japanese garden that we've now got, and we've got a bird feeder on the window. We put in the suet pellets from Pets at Home, and we get blue tits. And I think just one robin. We have one robin who valiantly holds his ground against the 90% blue tits who use the bird feeder. So that's a lovely space. It's very close to the university, and it's within walking distance. So that's a real blessing. And then I have my friends, my colleagues, an amazing support network around me, which includes medical support. So I've got a good relationship with my GP. I've got contact with Gorwellian as and when I need it. I can just walk in there and get the help that I need. And then I've got Aberystwyth, the town itself. It's a phenomenal place to live. I love the prom. I love walking on the river. I love going to coffee shops. I love the feel of the place. I love its kind of rhythms through the year. And the university I find a very supportive place. I find it a place of welcome, a place where diversity and inclusion are genuinely high priorities. People stop, people have time to talk to you. It's a friendly place, and I feel very lucky. So I feel blessed indeed. Thank you for listening.